Employment Program with the HCA. Thank you for taking time to join us for this meeting today, focusing on using strength-based approach when offering constructive feedback. Today we have our guest, contractor with Rutgers, Joni Dulce, Assistant Professor of the Department of Psychiatric Rehab and Counseling at Rutgers School of Health Professions. So we do encourage everybody to use the chat for interaction. And if it's a small enough group, is it okay for people to raise their hand to do some interactions today, Joni?
Absolutely. Raise your hand, unmute your mic. First raise your hand and Darren or myself will unmute your mic. So yeah, great. We encourage the participation. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Darren. Any housekeeping business to relay or?
Just make sure you're muted if you're not engaging, just to kind of limit that background noise.
Great, thank you. So we will get started. And as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, we will be recording. So just for you to know that, as Darren mentioned, we are going to be reviewing using a strengths-based approach when offering constructive feedback. So my first question is, what drew you to this topic? What kind of drew you to today's call or today's community of practice session? What about the topic was interesting or intriguing? You can unmute your mic or use the chat. Just kind of helps to hear what is it about this topic that you feel you'd want to learn more about. So the brief blurb that was included in the description of the topic was providing and accepting critical feedback is often a difficult skill to learn, whether we're offering constructive feedback to job seekers about their job seeking skills, such as interviews with employers or work performance concerns. It's never a particularly easy task in our role as employment specialists. This call focuses on identifying and practicing ways to provide feedback in a positive way that is encouraging and strengths-based. Pippa mentions I've used strengths-based feedback in other contexts and want additional practice in an employment context. Great. Thank you for your feedback, Pippa. How about others? What were some other reasons why you might have been drawn to today's topic? Bill mentions I provide career advice to our internal employees, and I would like more tools to provide strengths-based feedback so we can work towards a positive outcome. Great. So Bill's looking at it more internally, maybe even working within his agency with colleagues. Much of what we're going to review today is certainly transferable throughout all aspects of your professional and possibly personal lives. So we're going to get to it. If you've been, if you're writing in there, finish your thought and we'll get back to it. But why don't we jump into the objective? So we're going to define constructive feedback. So identify what specifically we're talking about when we are describing constructive feedback. We're going to identify the context where feedback is provided to job seekers and employees. So although much of this is transferable outside of your work as employment specialist or voc specialist, we are going to frame our topic today within employment services and career services. And then finally, we'll describe some strategies to provide constructive feedback to job seekers in a strengths-based and positive way. So we have a couple more things here in the chat before I go on. Trina mentions, I want to ensure that I am providing growth, not harm when coaching. Basically, I want to make sure the message is hopeful. Absolutely. Jamie, I am a manager and I'm working on how to provide constructive feedback to employees. So yes, as I mentioned, transferable skill, as Trina, would like to get out of this, providing that feedback to individuals in a hopeful way, in a way that's constructive and helpful and hopeful, and then also how to use that skill with employees that you may be supervising or interacting with. So before we get started, consider this. Think of a time when you were given feedback in maybe a negative or not so positive way. So think of a time that maybe your supervisor, colleague, others in your life might have given you feedback in a negative way. Um, they provided it in a not so constructive or positive manner. So as you're thinking about that time, how did you feel? And if you'd like to respond in the chat or unmute your mic, that would be great if you're comfortable doing so. We'll leave a minute or two to allow people to respond either in the chat. Looks like we have a response here. Bill, it can take away motivation and hope. Absolutely. So when that feedback is given in a way that's not so positive or constructively oriented, it can kind of sap that hope. Kimberly, it made me feel belittled. Yes. So you feel belittled, not important, you're not very hopeful. Other feelings that people would feel comfortable sharing? Thank you for sharing. I feel similarly as what Bill and um, Kimberly mentioned. You feel kind of worthless, right? You feel like you don't have much to offer. And for me, it's self-esteem sapping. Jamie mentions here in the chat, made me feel like I shouldn't even try. Yes. And we've, I don't know if you've encountered other webinars through Rutgers or other teams, but we talk about the why try effect. And researchers in our psych rehab world and in psychology in general have studied this effect that individuals that may experience a mental health condition, oftentimes because of maybe getting feedback in a way that's not so positive or living in environments that weren't very nurturing or positive or strengths-based. Sometimes people don't feel that their skills can contribute in a positive way, and they develop this illness identity and this why try effect. So thank you for sharing that in the text or in the chat. Now consider a time when you were given feedback in a positive way. So maybe again, it was a supervisor, maybe it was a colleague, maybe it was someone else in your life, a teacher. Yes, Trina, I don't have any info in today's session. Trina's asking in the chat, do I have any information on the why try effect? But yes, I have some papers and articles that were written that I can provide within the resources of this PowerPoint when I send it off to Darren and Dawn to distribute. So, but yes, I will send some information on that. Thank you. So yes, think of a time when you were given feedback in a positive way. How did you feel in that situation? Something here in the chat. Bill, it can help motivate you even if you had slight doubts. Yes. Yep. So even if you doubted maybe your skill to complete a certain task or your ability to do something or the confidence to engage in a goal towards employment or going back to school, having someone there providing feedback in a positive way can help you feel more interested, more engaged, more motivated to embark on that activity. Any other thoughts about a time when maybe you were given feedback in a positive way and how you might have felt during that time? I know for me personally, when I think about different times when I was given feedback and it was critical feedback, but it was given in a way that was positive and well thought out. I felt less defensive. I felt less frustrated. I felt more hopeful that if I tried again, I would succeed. So if you're still writing, continue your thought. We'll get back to it, but let's move on to thinking about, oh, we have one more. Let's read. Todd, from what I can think of, most positives are as general comments like good job, and negative feedback is more often and more specific. Yes, so sometimes that positive is more, good job, or, nice work. And the negative feedback is more specific. I think that's a good insight, Todd. Thank you. So what happens when feedback is delivered positively versus negatively? I think Todd just answered that question. Um, it's sometimes you have very little to go on when it's positive feedback. Someone might just say good job or nice work. The negative feedback, it's more specific. We also want to consider encouraging the person to achieve a goal versus people's feelings get hurt, might harm the relationship. There might be barriers to further communication. So when we are thinking about how we might be delivering feedback or offering feedback to individuals, when delivered well, when that feedback is delivered well, it can, as you mentioned in your responses to your own personal stories, it can motivate that person to want to achieve a goal, to want to work towards or achieve desired outcomes. However, if it's developed in a not very strengths-based or positive way, it still might be critical in nature. It still might not necessarily be positive in the sense of, the person did a good job. It still might be the person may need to improve in certain areas, but when it's given in a strength-based way, that encourages the person to achieve the goal, the opposite, people's feelings might get hurt. There might be some resentment. There might be some relationship, your relationship, your therapeutic relationship with the person might be impacted, right? They may not consider you as someone they want to partner with or collaborate with. They might shut down and create barriers to further communication. Todd, if it's negative, people may avoid interactions and even no-show for appointments as a result. Absolutely. So you may not know what's happening, and you may even think, see, I knew that person wasn't interested or wasn't motivated to continue, and you might have that kind of negative thoughts about that person, when in reality, it might have been that barrier has already been put in front of the person, and their feelings might have been hurt. So we're going to talk a little bit today. We don't have that much time together for these calls, but we're going to get into, and I provide a lot of resources on how to deliver constructive feedback. So first, let's identify what constructive feedback is. And I'm sure, just so we're all kind of on the same page with this, outlines a concern, right? It's more than just general advice for someone, but gives specific information on how the person can make positive changes. It's an opportunity to have a conversation with a person, to discuss together what strategies they may need to improve. So it promotes a positive relationship when done effectively. Just as you all kind of answer to that initial question about when you receive feedback in a negative way versus in a positive strengths-based way, you can also consider how that may have promoted a more positive relationship with that person. So I'm going to kind of flip it on you again with a question here. When we're working with people in employment services or career services, or any really community-based service that you might be providing, under what circumstances might you offer feedback to job seekers? So when you're working with individuals participating in your employment services or housing services, and they're either looking for work or already employed, so what circumstances, what times would you be offering feedback to individuals participating in your services, whether they're job seeking or they might be on the job already and be working. What think about when you are in positions where you're providing constructive feedback. When, what are those circumstances? You can unmute your mic or use the chat or raise your hand if you'd prefer. Amy, resumes, appropriate attire or presentation if they secure an interview, absolutely. So when someone completes a resume, that might be a circumstance when you may need to offer feedback. And maybe that feedback isn't necessarily going to be good job, nice work. Maybe it's something of a more constructive or critical nature that the person might need to improve for that resume to look polished and professional. Maybe it's appearance or presentation skills, getting ready for an interview. And that might not just be, like we saw in the chat, nice job, good work. It might be something really impactful on that for that person to land the interview or get the job. Bill is writing here in the chat, if we notice something that could be correct, fixed, or improved that would benefit them during the job seeking process, their dress or resume or interview techniques. Yes. So how do you feel about providing constructive feedback in those situations when you're working with individuals and it's feedback that's not necessarily positive, if it's feedback that the person needs to improve in a certain area or learn the skill more effectively? How do you feel in those circumstances when you're offering feedback to job seekers? When someone's resume doesn't look that great, or someone's presentation for an interview isn't what might be appropriate for that particular job or might be acceptable in that career, or maybe it's the way the person is dressing or responding to questions. How do you feel when you have to provide that feedback in those situations? What are some of those emotions and feelings that come up for you?
Joni, this is
Yes.
Jessica.
Hi, Jessica.
Um, Hello. I wasn't sure how to write this or explain it in the chat, but like I feel that when I have to have those conversations, I make sure I'm very careful on how I'm wording.
Mm-hmm.
That way I'm not offending a customer if I need to talk to them. Don't want to make them feel like if I have to help, revise resume that it's not good. I mean, I just let them know, let's make some edits or some changes. Let me provide some suggestions because I don't want to make them feel like it's their effort wasn't good.
Right. So maybe you
So,
find something positive to comment first about the resume. If there's something, a strength
mhm.
or a skill that they exhibited when creating the resume, it sounds like that could be a helpful strategy. Is that something, Jessica, that you typically, when you're in those situations, do offer some sort of positive first and then maybe get into the more critical feedback?
Yeah, I think I do because again, I don't want them to feel like not wanting to try or put in an effort. I want to acknowledge that they did, probably what they could.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm here just to kind of support and hopefully help improve and get them into a job.
Yeah, thank you. So we have two more. Bill's mentioning while the feedback can be seen as negative, we can provide it in a manner that focuses on the positive outcomes that could come with this change. Yes. And Carla, I think how can I turn into a motivational interview to where I ask them questions that would look at it like would look like if you did this. How does this sound to you? Yes, using those motivational interviewing skills, asking questions, reflecting, absolutely. And we're going to get into some specific tools and strategies to use. Bill, if you have ability to unmute your mic or maybe expand in the chat, while the feedback can be seen as negative, we can provide it in a manner that focuses on the positive outcomes that could come with this change. Can you maybe describe an example or maybe offer some follow-up to that? I think that's an excellent point, and certainly
Yeah, certainly. I think my thought process behind that was just sometimes kind of like the example that Carly gave as well. Look at yourself. Do you
yes.
feel that you are, providing the professional appearance that, you would want if you were on the other side of the table? Or, hey, if we take this time to update your resume, your cover letter, things of that nature, yes, it is, it's pretty good, but we can maybe make it excellent. And maybe this gets us a few more calls, for interviews, things of that nature. Try to sell it in. A little more work now is going to pay us dividends in the end.
Absolutely. Maybe share some examples of good resumes that you might find online, just so the person has something to kind of work towards and can see that, this resume, like Bill said, can get them maybe the job that they want, maybe putting in that time. Absolutely. And I love Carla's response too around motivational interviewing. It really talking with the person, using those oars, open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summarizing those sessions that you have to really help the person continue to stay engaged in this process. Amy writes, I try to let them be the expert. Yep, classic motivational interviewing. The person is the expert. So I noticed this statement on your resume. I feel like you might be able to expand on this. Can you tell me more about that? Help the individual to shift to their perspective and help with that decisional process. Yes, so pull out from the person additional information, maybe information that you know from your career profile that you've done with the person or other types of initial information gathering, but you might know that and have that person be able to expand on it. And that does a couple of things. It, like you said, it kind of shifts their perspective into a more strengths-based, yes, I do have skills. Yes, I can expand on this. It was more than just the brief sentence that I wrote. It allows that person to really describe their skill or their effort in that certain area. Absolutely. So we talked about the job seeking skills, resumes, interviews, talking with employers. What about other circumstances when the person is on the job and maybe you're providing support to the person through whether it's on-site job coaching or off-site support, and the employer, so either to you because you might have that relationship with the employer as a job coach, and the individual that you're working with might support that, or the person that's working might come back, look, I keep getting reprimanded on the job, or I keep getting, my boss keeps telling me that I'm not doing things right, or even the supervisor comes to you and says, the person's not paying attention, or whatever the problem might be. You might be in a situation where that's a circumstance where you're offering feedback to someone, that you have to maybe offer feedback regarding the supervisor's impression or what the supervisor is telling you about the person's work. So not only in the job search, but also when the person is working to help that person maintain employment. Are there any examples that you can think of that from that latter experience, working with someone who is on the job and maybe a supervisor comes to you, or you observe a situation where the person just isn't completing the task, or is doing it ineffectively, or maybe not communicating, or interacting with coworkers in a collegial way, whatever it might be? Has that experience happened? And how did you respond? You can unmute your mic or write in the chat, whatever's your preference. Okay, looks like we have a couple of Pippa applying a strength from a different part of their life to their work life. Like if they are successfully working with members of their music band, how could they apply those same behaviors on the job? Yes, I love that, Pippa. Finding that strength maybe elsewhere. Maybe it's not necessarily within the employment setting. Maybe it is in a different setting in their life. Absolutely. Christina, would we not be wise to be cautious in saying someone's approach is not effective? Yeah, I don't think you want to use language that's, you know, unhelpful or negative. So you certainly want to be mindful of your language. Diana, sometimes they request feedback to help them do better in the future. Yes. So sometimes the employee might request that feedback. So I think this is just to illustrate that there are many circumstances that you might be in a position to offer feedback to supported employees or job seekers, whether it's regarding the job search itself or once the person is in the job, there might need to be feedback regarding performance. So we're going to get into some of these specifics, how to offer constructive feedback. And there are probably multiple types of resources out there. I'm just kind of following this kind of structure here. More information can be found with the link below. People have differing levels of sensitivity to feedback. Someone may be more sensitive to any feedback, whether it's stated in a positive or more constructive manner. So we want to be mindful of how the person responds to feedback. That's kind of first and foremost. We want to help reframe what is seen as maybe critical. So how do we reframe or view the feedback from employers or other providers? So how can we help the person reframe that feedback? I think you gave a lot of good examples already. Look at how it could benefit you in the future. How can it help you land that job if you're thinking about the resume? Or how can learning a certain skill or a certain way of interacting with in other coworkers, how can that help for the future, and reframing that? Also reframing it, just as Pippa had mentioned, maybe exploring other areas of the person's life where they might be really excelling in that particular area that they're maybe getting feedback or constructive criticism around on the job. So helping to reframe that. So to give constructive feedback, you may want to consider in today's kind of remote setting, maybe you're working 100% remotely, maybe you're working hybrid schedule. What would be the benefit of in-person or remote? Email or other non-face-to-face ways might make it more difficult to convey your tone of voice or other body language, and it may come off in a more harsh way. So maybe giving feedback in person would be preferred if possible, but if you need to provide that feedback remotely, consider how you would do that in a way that the person can still sort of sense or get a better understanding of what your tone might be, or particularly if it's email and they aren't able to visually see you. You also want to consider your feelings or your own kind of emotional state. Do you feel any particular way? Are you upset with the employer or frustrated in the situation, or whatever those feelings might be that you might have. You want to maybe practice providing the feedback with a colleague or your supervisor beforehand, maybe to ensure that you're calm. Maybe you're just upset. Maybe it's just maybe you feel sad that this is happening, or other types of emotion. But practicing with a supervisor, a colleague, to make sure that you're able to provide that feedback to someone in a confident and calm way. Be empathic, but also genuine, right? So we want the feedback to be concrete, but also tempered in an empathic way. Provide your assessment of any strengths that the person has, but really make sure you're providing that assessment in a very genuine manner. So, it has to be a real affirmation, or a real, genuine, sincere kind of compliment, if you will, or assessment of what their strengths might be. And then give specific examples if you have. So I've noticed that you were unsure how to respond when the interviewer asked you about why you left your past job. So maybe you were able to observe the person in an interview, and you were observing that the person kind of got flustered or was unable to respond to the interviewer when asked, why did you leave your past job? So be very specific. I've noticed that you haven't been preparing for interviews lately. What's happening? Or your employer contacted me regarding you calling out of work at the last minute. So your feedback should relate to the current examples, or whatever the problem or specific situation might be. So provide active listening, provide an opportunity to hear the person's response, give the person ample time to discuss kind of their side and what their perception of the situation might be, particularly if it's regarding, an employer's feedback. Listen to the person, use your active listening skills, use your motivational interviewing skills, to try to pull out that information that's going to be helpful when you are able to offer tangible suggestions. So we kind of are going into this next step, offering concrete suggestions or opportunities for the person to correct whatever is problematic. It may be helpful to plan out beforehand what solutions you want to maybe offer or present as part of your feedback. So coming in with some solutions that you've been thinking about, certainly getting the solutions first and foremost from the individual, and getting their input. And certainly that's our primary goal, is to hear from the person what solutions have helped them in the past. Encourage the person to think about in past jobs or past job seeking skills, interviews, and filling out resumes and applications. What are some of the solutions that they might have? And then maybe also be prepared with some of your own solutions and suggestions. And certainly encourage achievable solutions. So something that the person can readily achieve, or work towards achieving, with small milestones and small achievements along the way. And then finally, offer your help and support as they make the change. So be encouraging, empower the person to implement the solutions that you and them just talked about. You could set maybe a due date with them, as long as it's something that they feel is manageable and feasible, if that's, acceptable to them, or ask them to check in with you at a certain time frame for a follow-up meeting, but kind of support the change, but also help to identify some follow-up. And you can help the person feel valued and supported by showing that a feedback conversation isn't the only time that they have your attention. So in other words, it's not just you providing this corrective feedback or again, whether it's job seeker or others on the call here have said that maybe within your own agencies, it's supporting that change also means following it up with another meeting, making sure that they know that you're there to help them and support them and encourage them to make that change or make the adjustments or whatever that feedback might be. Any questions about how to offer constructive feedback? Again, this is kind of a more streamlined way of thinking about it, but if you can kind of touch on each of these steps, particularly, I like the idea of understanding your own feelings around it. You know, in my past, I've worked in supported employment as a job coach and employment specialist for a number of years, and it was oftentimes very challenging in the beginning to provide that feedback. My feelings would be, you know, I'd either be like really upset with the employer, you know, oftentimes if I didn't feel like they were being supportive or whatever that might be, but having discussions with colleagues, talking it through with my supervisor was really helpful for me to kind of maintain a composed confidence when I had to speak with the job seeker or employee. Any questions or thoughts on kind of this list of strategies or this framework, if you will? Would you include anything? And what might that be?
This is Pippa talking.
Hi, Pippa.
I'm just thinking about like when giving tangible suggestions to try to connect them to something else the person has already done or can already do. So building in like small increments from something they are already skilled at.
Absolutely. I love that idea. So those tangible suggestions, have those connect to strengths and skills that the person has already accomplished or mastered or is mastering. Absolutely. That's a great suggestion. Anything else that others might add or expand on? And again, that active listening is really just listening to the person and using your reflections and open-ended questions and your attending skills, you know, the head nodding and this smiling, matching your facial expressions to the person, having that congruence. So sometimes this is where we lose a few people, but I thought it could be a helpful way in a breakout room to really identify an instance when you would like to provide correct constructive feedback to a job seeker you're working with. And I use the term job seeker to also include individuals who are working. So job seeker, employee that you're working with, the feedback can be around the job search or employment and practicing the steps of offering feedback and then switching roles. It looks like we've already lost a few people. So maybe instead of a breakout session, we use the larger group to walk through maybe an example that you might have that we can kind of walk through this process of providing feedback. So instead of a breakout session, I think what we'll do is just kind of use the group setting before so that we can kind of have a nice robust discussion together. Is anyone interested in providing an example or offering, you know, to volunteer, to think about an instance when you're interested in giving constructive feedback to someone, whether it's a current situation or maybe a past situation, and it's someone in the job search or someone who's already working? How would you kind of go through these steps? And again, this is very brief, so we wouldn't be able to expand on it, but if anyone is interested in volunteering, that would be great. I'll just wait a little bit to see if anyone's interested in volunteering.
Hi, my name is Trina.
Hi, Trina.
Read everything, but I will say that I always try to start with asking them if they're ready, or like how are they currently feeling? Because if you're trying to give any sort of feedback when somebody is not in the best of headspace, it's not going to go the way that you want it in the first place.
Absolutely. So try to get a sense of where the person is at right now, and in terms of their emotional state. You know, if they're just coming off of getting really negative critical feedback from an employer, maybe now might not be the best time. I love that suggestion to be able to kind of assess where the person is at and get an understanding and ask them, you know, is now a good time for us to talk about some of that feedback that you received, or you know, I have some feedback to provide. What are your thoughts on today, or us talking about it today, or would you prefer to reschedule or have a, you know, meeting at a later date? So think about someone that you might be working with and kind of use this group activity kind of with maybe colleagues that you're working with, maybe your coworkers in the office, or maybe a supervisor, and you can kind of walk through this, or even your own, you know, after the training is over, think about how you would identify the best way to provide it, whether it's in person or remote, and why would that be the best? Consider how you would reflect and acknowledge your own feelings about the situation and your current emotional state. How would you reflect and acknowledge what your feelings are? How would you be able to get a good sense of what your thoughts are about the situation? Maybe it's getting outside perspective, maybe it's you know, journaling, whatever that might be, or thinking about what it is. Give specific examples. Maybe you want to jot down what those specific examples are. Maybe they're observations or information from others, interviewers or employers, or maybe you've observed the person interviewing or interacting, and you want to provide those specific examples, again, provided in a way that acknowledges the person's strengths and skills and abilities, while also providing that feedback for growth. Active listening, maybe do some, you know, practice active listening with a coworker or friend or supervisor. Practice, you know, your openness, your solar, right? So your you know, open stance, and maintaining eye contact and having a relaxed manner. Maybe provide those tangible, concrete suggestions, what they might be, and then offer your support. So you can go through that kind of on your own, accepting feedback from others. So maybe we'll switch a little bit. Who might job seekers receive feedback from? So we've identified employers. Who else might job seekers be receiving feedback from? Unmute your mic or use the chat. And what types of feedback are they receiving, whether it's experience or customers? So it might be customers that they're working with. Might be coworkers. And think about, you know, what types of feedback are they typically receiving? Let's see. Friends and family might be both positive and negative. Yeah, so feedback might be around anything. If it's friends and family, it might be, you know, you're not looking for work hard enough, or whatever that might be. those are the types of feedback messages people might be receiving, and also they might be receiving feedback, individuals might be receiving feedback from a variety of sources. So we can help someone, we can teach job seekers, individuals that we're working with on ways to accept feedback. Again, kind of a quick down and dirty description, but you can find out more information using the resource listed below. What we really want to do is help the person walk through this, if you will. The first step in receiving any sort of constructive feedback or criticism, if you will, is to listen and make a concerted effort really to remain non-defensive about it, which is very difficult at times, right? So when I am given feedback, my immediate thought is, I want to defend myself, I want to defend my reasons or whatever it might be. But practicing not being defensive is really a skill, and we can role play and work with individuals to help practice that. And that may not be a problem for many individuals, but it may be for some individuals that you're working with. We want to encourage the person to thank the person for bringing this to their attention. Maybe you want to encourage them to ask any kind of clarifying questions or any information that might be unclear. So if the person is sort of if the person is going to be accepting feedback from an employer, you can walk through these steps to help the person identify, yes, thank you for bringing this to my attention. Maybe through a role play, you can encourage the person to clarify any information that's not necessarily clear before they make any sort of statement or restatement. Restating here in the third little piece of the arrow, help the person learn how to restate to the employer or the person who's providing the feedback. It sounds like you are saying, whatever the feedback is, I heard you say, so, help the person learn how to restate so that they can, again, clarify with the person what exactly it is that, what's the specific feedback. Ask the person who's providing the feedback for solutions. What would be a possible solution for me to remedy this, or how can I improve it on this? What are some solutions that you might have? And then follow up. So encourage the job seeker or the supported employee to follow up with the person providing the feedback. Maybe ask to meet at a later date. Can we meet in a week or two, or can we meet next Tuesday to check in on my improvements and see how it's going, and then thanking them again for their time. So it's, kind of just a sequential way of encouraging and teaching individuals how to accept that feedback, and maybe through some role plays or other strategies that you might use with individuals. Maybe they can role play it with their family and friends and kind of report back to you and follow up of how it went. So in psychiatric rehabilitation services, a core principle is a strengths-based approach. So strengths-based is rather than looking at deficits or disease or things that are negative around the person, it really looks at the person's strengths and capabilities, looks at the person's interests, knowledge, and what they're capable of doing instead of what they're not capable of doing. So it's a very recovery and strengths focused. So I kind of put these 6 areas of the principle up here for you to, just as a reminder. All individuals have the capacity to learn and grow and change. activities that are helping. So whatever type of helping activity you're providing occurs in a natural setting. So a setting that's natural to the person. So, helping the person learn a skill in the environment that they're going to be using that skill, collaborative, mutual partnership, getting from the person, just like Trina mentioned, is now a good time? What are your thoughts about what's happening or what the employer said about XYZ. Individuals are autonomous and responsible for their own recovery. Encourage that independence and empowerment. And the entire community is viewed as potential resources. So really looking at the community as full of resources. So there may be resources that the person can access outside of your agency or program that might be helpful in many ways. For today's session, might be helpful to learn different skills related to accepting feedback or interacting with others. So let's kind of put it all together. So think about a time when feedback you provided was not welcomed positively. So when you were working with someone, maybe there was a time when you provided feedback and the person really pushed back, or wasn't welcomed positively, and you really, intended for it to be a constructive discussion and a positive discussion, and it wasn't. What was the circumstance and the outcome, and what would you do differently? So maybe we can see if we have a volunteer. You can use the chat or unmute your mic or raise your hand. So think about a time when feedback you provided to someone, and it can, ideally, if it's within your work setting, but if it's something outside of work, that would certainly work for the example too. What was the circumstance and what was the outcome? And what would you do differently? So even if you're not responding by chat or unmuting your mic, think about that. So think about a time when feedback that you provided wasn't necessarily welcomed positively. What would you do differently?
I can say something I would do differently.
Thank you, Amy.
Yeah. So in this episode or scenario, it was with the employee, and the feedback just didn't seem by body language and such to be received well. It wasn't necessarily that the person pushed back in the moment, but I could tell
Yes.
this was not being received well by body language. And the person, I couldn't seem to get them to speak toward what was going on. So I wasn't comfortable with the outcome of the interaction, and what I wish I did differently in the initial meeting would have been what somebody suggested, maybe to speak directly toward my observation of the person's body language.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure how I would do that. It always feels uncomfortable because it's my observation. So I always get very uncomfortable on that. But, speaking to that, like, it seems like maybe you need a few minutes or some time to process this.
Mm-hmm.
Let's set a follow-up right now while we're here, rather than having to like worry and wait, or then see that person the next time I saw them and still not feel like it was buttoned up. I think I'll use that suggestion.
That's a great suggestion. Supporting them in that change, letting them know that it's not just today's interaction and that's it, but it really is something that you want to follow up on and continue to discuss, or give them the opportunity to meet at a later date if that's more comfortable.
Yeah, I think that processing piece for the person has to be allowed for. We don't all process information the same. So yeah, that is something I'm going to use. I like that suggestion of checking in with the client or the person sometimes at the beginning when you know you're going to be talking about some difficult subjects.
Yes, that's great. Great suggestion. Thank you. So we did not review job development successes and challenges today. We talked about constructive feedback and defined it. We identified some strategies to provide constructive feedback and also some tools, like kind of quick visual to help teach someone how to respond to constructive feedback. Lots of resources and references that you'll have on the presentation slides. I'll also add the information on the why try effect and some of the resources around that. And maybe we can even schedule an upcoming job developers call on that topic. So thank you. If anyone has questions, you can certainly ask now, or I'll put my email in the chat. Please feel free to email me if you have any questions moving forward, or even if you have ideas or suggestions for future calls, you can let Dawn or Darren know, or me. And then my contact information is here. Are there any questions that people have? If not, Darren can kind of conclude the meeting and share any final thoughts regarding becoming an FCS provider, which is here. Looks like there's
Yeah, thank you all for joining us today. A lot of great conversations and folks coming off the mic. So I appreciate people rolling up their sleeves and participating in this and really reinforcing that relationship building while you're working with job seekers so that you can have some of these challenging conversations. So definitely we'll be sending out the PowerPoint as well as some information. Thank you for joining us today. If you do have any questions or interested in talking more about fidelity reviews, we're going through the HCA incentivized process right now. So please reach out to Don or myself if you have any questions about that. So thank you so much for your time and expertise today, Joni, and particularly all the folks who chimed in today. Great content.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone. Enjoy your day. Bye.
Bye-bye.